Now that I have my island terrain more or less roughed out, I want to start to think about incorporating 3D objects into the environment and making them interactive. Now, in order to set up the next phase of this project, I've provided a couple of resources to you. So inside the lessons folder, I've provided an island scripts, a GUI, and a couple of different coin models. And so I've just downloaded these assets to my desktop, and I want to incorporate them into my project folder. Looks like I missed Island Scripts, so I'll right click on the link, I'll do a quick save as. I'm going to save it to the desktop, and I'll save. Once that asset has downloaded, what I want to do is I want to incorporate these into my assets folder for my island project. So I'm going to go into my external drive, into my class folder. I'm working on my island project, and I want to integrate these into my assets folder. So what I'll do is I'll unzip my island scripts folder, and I'll just drag that island scripts folder into the assets folder of the project that I'm working on. Now remember, I could do this two different ways. I could do this through the system finder and just drag and drop the island scripts into the assets folder. And now when I go back to Unity, you'll notice that I now have an island scripts folder. Well, I could also, I'll just unzip this GUI folder. In addition to dragging directly into my assets folder, I could also drag this directly into the Unity project folder. So I have my assets folder selected, and now I can click and drag my GUI directly into my assets folder. And once I do that, I'm basically accomplishing the same thing. So whether I drag these assets into directly into the Unity interface, or if I feel like I could manage these assets a little better through the system finder, I can do that. But the important thing is that at this point, we're building our own folders to keep track of the content that we're creating. So when I look inside my assets folder, I have my standard assets, and these are all the things that I imported that came with Unity. I have my train assets, which I had downloaded from the Unity asset store. I have some textures that I created, so I built this texture folder, and I'm starting to incorporate some basic textures into that. We'll use those textures a bit later. At this point, I have a GUI folder, I have an island scripts folder, and we'll get to using some of those assets a bit later. Finally, I have these coin models. And I want to point out a couple of things when it comes to the coin models. Depending on the software that you're using and how your system is configured, you have a couple of different options. The models.zip file I've downloaded to my desktop, and I'll just double click and unzip that folder. Now before I integrate it into Unity, I just want to open it up and show you what the contents are. At this point, this is just a standard Cinema 4D file. I have the .c4d model, and I have the text folder, which includes a Photoshop document of a texture. If I double click and I open up this asset inside Cinema 4D, I'll give it a quick render. You can see what this is. It's just a simple cylinder with texture that's been applied to it. If I select this cylinder, you can see that the height of this object, or the radius of this object, is 50 centimeters. Now, I had mentioned in previous presentations that when we start creating content in separate applications, so we're building models in Cinema 4D, or we find some models that we want to use, to better understand their scale, we need to keep in mind the scale that Unity is operating at. Now, Unity works on a scale of meters. So if I create something like a cube, and this cube happens to be 200 centimeters tall along the y-axis, and let me just narrow down the x-axis and the z-axis so we get a better sense of this. This model in Cinema 4D is 200 centimeters tall, which is roughly 2 meters tall. Okay, so there's 100 centimeters in 1 meter. And so if I think of this object as 2 meters tall, I'll just jump back into Unity for a second, and I'll create a game object, a cube, and I'll zoom in on this cube. Not so close. I'll back off just a little bit. I'll move this down closer to the ground. and I'll scale this up along the y-axis to 2 meters, which is equivalent to 200 centimeters. Okay, that's about the height of an average person. Or if we look at this first-person controller, it's roughly as tall as this capsule object that's used by the first-person controller. So we could think of this size and this scale, and I'll just bump down the X and the Z value to 0.5 to make it a little bit slimmer. This is about the size of a person inside our environment. So if I zoom out, now I get a better sense of what the size of the island and the environment is. Okay, so it's just important to kind of keep this in mind so that we don't make extremely huge models inside Unity or Cinema 4D and then try to apply some physics or some interactivity to them and have them function in a way that we didn't anticipate. So I'm going to jump back into Cinema 4D. So this is about the same size of the object that I created directly inside Unity, and I'm just using this as a temporary reference to show you how large the coin is relative to what a person would be inside my environment. Okay, so I'll just delete this cube, or I'll close it without saving. So what I have is a Cinema 4D file inside a folder called Models. I have a .c4d and a .tex, which contains the textures, and typically all we have to do to integrate a 3D model into the Unity environment is just drag it into the interface, okay, or drag it into the assets folder and make it part of the search path of Unity, and Unity will update this file, it'll run a plugin and adapt that Cinema 4D file so that it can be used directly in the game environment. So if I click and drag and drop my models folder into my assets folder, and again I could do that two different ways, directly into Unity, or I could go find my project folder. I could go find my project folder and drag that models folder directly into my project. Once it's inside the assets folder, it's part of the search path of Unity. So the next time we go back to Unity, Unity will scan and update the model. Now, you see I have my models folder, and I ran into a little bit of a glitch. I should be able to drag and drop this coin now inside this environment. And you may experience a similar situation. Now, the glitch that I've discovered, or that I'm running into, is that I'm using the educational version of Cinema 4D R14. And for some reason, I don't know if it's unique to the setup that I have, for some reason Unity doesn't like that version of the software, or at least it doesn't automatically import the models. So if you run into this situation and you're using the student version of Cinema 4D 14, there's just one extra hoop that you need to jump through. If you're using a previous version of Cinema 4D or the professional version of Cinema 4D, you should be able to import this model simply by dragging and dropping the way that I did. Unity comes with a host of importer plugins. So whether you're using Blender, 3D Studio Max, Maya, Cinema 4D, when you generate a model, you should be able to drag that model directly into the assets folder. It should update and read, and then at that point you should be able to drag the file into your environment and see it. The glitch or the bug that I'm bumping into, I suspect, has to do with the student or educational version, because on a similar setup, using the Pro version of Cinema 4D, I'm able to do this with the exact same software. The only difference is that it's not the educational version of Cinema 4D. I'm going to try to get to the bottom of that and see what this bug is, but it's not unusual for us to have to model something and then export that model as an FBX model to be able to use it in different environments. And so I want to draw your attention back to Blackboard just for a moment, and I've provided a version of this model as an FBX model, and a couple of notes that in the event that you run into the same issue that I just ran into, which is that I can't drag my coin object into this environment, you can do one of two things. Either I can go into my assets folder and into my models project folder and open this file back up in Cinema 4D and just do a quick file export as FBX. This is a more universal file format. I'll save this as coin and I'll just include FBX in the title because once we get inside Unity, we won't see the file extension. And I'll save that in the same location. I'm going to let everything default. I'll say OK. And now when I go back to Unity, you'll see that I now have a coin FBX model that I can use inside this environment. I'll click drag and drop, and now I have a coin. Just make sure that's above ground. And now when I hit the play button, my first person camera drops into the environment and I'm looking around, and now I can see that I have a coin floating in space. Okay, it's a little high off the ground, but now there's my game object that I created in Cinema 4D, and I had to export it as an FBX in order to get it to work. Alternatively, what you can do, I'll just turn my play button off here. Alternatively, you can just download the coin FBX.zip model. You can unzip that, and what you're left with is the same coin.fbx file that I just created. What you'll need to do at that point is just make sure that you stay organized, and I recommend building inside the assets folder in Unity, build a models folder, and then drag the coin file into that folder. And at that point, you'll have this same asset. So you can either use the assets that I provided, or you can build your own, but make sure that you experiment with the process of importing a simple 3D model into the Unity environment. And I'll share with you a couple of different ways to do that in the next presentation.